Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. We are now recording. Welcome to today's CATHETA webinar. We are coming to you live on October 24th. If we have any NLC webinar first-timers here today who don't know this yet, CATHETA means learning in Creek. And today you're going to be learning about collaborative grant writing, translating theory into practice from Diane Leonard. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. All of us are so thrilled that you could join us both for today's webinar as well as on our new platform. We're still very excited. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law pictured here. So just a special note that the materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Before we get started, I want to familiarize you with the new platform and where things can be found. So I have posted a link for you to today's presentation slides. It's both in the chat as well as the shared notes section. And then you can also access it later on if you need to by going into the courses section when you're on the platform. You can go through, learn a little bit more about your instructor. She has a resource material provided for you. You can download that there as well. And then later on, if you want to catch the webinar recording or you want to share that with one of your colleagues, you can find that posted to the course as well. In the future, when you do want to come on and join any of our webinars, as long as you log in while one of them is currently happening and live, you'll just log into the system, CATHETA Constant Learning, and then you'll be able to click on that big green banner that's at the top of your screen, and that will take you into the webinar room. Know that when you first start, it's going to ask you to do an audio test. It'll invite you to either speak and listen or listen only. We are asking attendees to please select listen only, and that way when you join the webinar, it's not creating any kind of audio feedback from your mic being on. And then if you join and you realize the webinar sound isn't coming out of the speaker that you'd prefer, if you click on this little phone icon that's down at the bottom, it'll bring up a list of both your microphone and your speaker devices. And so you can go ahead and choose what it is that you would prefer to use. Okay. There are some ways to interact during the webinar because I know we have you muted, but we do still want, that participation. So know that if you would like to engage using the open chat, you can come over here to the public chat and type in whatever message you want to say, and then you would just hit enter, or you'd click on that little paper airplane button, and that'll send it into the chat for everyone to see. If you open the chat now, again, you can see various links that I've already posted in there for you. I have also posted them to the shared notes section. If you do join and you have your mic on, you can always mute it by just clicking on the microphone icon down at the bottom of the screen. And then if you want to raise your hand, like let's say you ask a question in the chat and you think maybe we didn't notice, or you went past that topic, you could always raise your hand to help us draw attention to it. We also have a fun way that you can interact that's new on this program. So this lets you do little status updates. So if you want to employ that feature, you can just go over to the users list. You'll click on your name and set status, and then it'll come up with a list. So you could signal that you've walked away. You could raise your hand from there as well. Show that you're undecided, confused, sad, happy, show applause, give a thumbs up, give a thumbs down. You can change them up throughout the webinar, and then you can also just clear it out if you don't want it to say anything. But if you do it, I'll show you real quick on mine. It gives you a cute little emoticon next to your name. So you can see I just added mine as happy, so now there's a smiley face next to my name in the users list. So just something fun that we can do to interact during the webinar. But I am going to ask everybody if you could please start testing out the chat for us now. You can go in there, let us know your name, where you're joining us from, tribal affiliation, as well as your professional role or the work that you do in Indian country. And then just a final note before I hand it off to today's instructor. We learned through some of our testing that if you click over on that large red menu panel, it does pull you out of the actual virtual class, the live webinar. So if that happens, no worries. You'll go back to a screen where you'll see that big green banner at the top, and you can just click your way back into the webinar that way. But I do just want to give you a heads up that if you do click on any of that red panel menu, it's going to pull you right out of the webinar. But not to fear, you'll just be able to click on the green banner once again, and you'll be able to jump back in that way. All right, folks, it is with great pleasure that I introduce today's webinar instructor, Diane Leonard. And Diane, I am going to pass it off to you now.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's course, Collaborative Grant Writing, Translating Theory into Practice. I love all things grants. Brooke can attest to it. I could talk about grants all day, every day. And in fact, that's what my bio slide tells you, that is actually what I do. I have been in the grant-related field my entire career. I was first on the grant seeking side. So I was a program officer for a statewide public foundation and have been on the grant seeking side now for more than 2 decades, doing day-to-day hands-on grant writing work and also teaching grant writing like today's session. And in these 2+ decades, I have seen some good, I've seen some not so good, and I've seen some okay collaborations. And it's not that the organizations involved in these collaborations don't have the best of intentions, but it's hard. Grant writing is hard from the beginning. Add in multiple organizations and different organizational cultures, and it just gets that much more stressful. So we're going to talk about that today, and I'm going to bring all of my practical experience in facilitating collaborative writing applications into today's session. Now, one last, I think maybe most important thing about me, this work is stressful. It has an incredibly high rate of burnout. And so our team at DH Leonard Consulting focuses a great deal on what we can do to operate at a sustainable pace as a team and as individuals. For me, that means running, or this morning I went with strength workout. So check that box, and 1 good cup of coffee. I would love it if, in addition to what you shared about where you're joining from today, if you want to get even a little more warmed up in that chat box and let me know what is fueling your work, what helps you stay sustainable as you think about grants. I would love to hear that extra bit about your work. So what are we going to cover? Well, we're going to think about the different reasons we come together for collaboration. We're going to talk about some of the goods, some of the tough parts, some of the pros, the cons of collaborative writing arrangements. We'll look at how tools can help us when we're facilitating these different applications of various shapes and sizes. I'm going to talk you through some different facilitation ideas that will then maybe give you some food for thought as we look at case studies and how we could learn from them. Now, I do at the end always ask if there's any outstanding questions that you want to have answered before we end the session. But please do not feel that you have to leave questions till the end. Don't keep them in a parking lot. I am happy to entertain your questions right in the moment. Please go ahead and let us know in the chat box if you have any question at all. And if I don't see it right away, if you want to use one of those status updates, raise your hand in that user feature. Happy to have that happen as well. All right, and I see there's some fantastic things, a variety of things, fueling your work, energy teas, video games, empowering and training native solar warriors. So everything from what's physically actually fueling you to the work and the impact of what you're doing. I love it. There's no right or wrong answer to that question. Thank you so much to those of you that shared. So as we think about collaborations and what that looks like in grant writing, I don't want to make any assumptions about your experience with grant writing collaborations. So I do have a few more questions for you. Could you let me know how many of you have been part of a grant application that had more than one organization? So 2 or more organizations were coming together to write one collaborative application. Could you let me know if you've been part of a collaboration like that with a Y for yes or an N for no? No judgment, no right or wrong answer, just trying to get a sense of what has happened for folks here in the room. All right, I see we've got a mix, some yes, some no. I like Angelica's not yet. You're headed for it. Now, one of the things when we think about collaborations and what that means for the grant application, how are we sharing the dollars, right? Each organization needs the grant dollars you're applying for to do your awesome work. What does that mean if we're collaborating with different organizations trying to achieve what we really want, that revenue? So where I wanted to start was talking about the different reasons that some organizations say yes, this extra level of complication, this potentially extra stress around grant applications, the potential of sharing revenue, it might be worth it. So I've got 5 different scenarios that I've outlined. There could be more, but these are some of the most common that my team and I have seen. And so where I'll start is with interagency collaboration. What this means is that 2 or more grant-seeking organizations come together in order to apply for one grant opportunity. This could be that you as a tribal organization are going to be the lead applicant, maybe to a federal grant, maybe to a state grant, maybe to a private foundation, but maybe you are going to be the lead applicant. But there are other community partners that are going to be part of that work. And there could be some sharing of revenue, not necessarily an even splitting of the money, not an even splitting of the pie or the dessert, but that there will be some monetary support for the collaborative partners, that all of the money does not go just to the lead applicant. There are plenty of opportunities, especially if we think about what posts in grants.gov for federal funding, where it is limited to only tribal organizations as a lead applicant. So that's probably the most likely reason that someone would reach out to you as an organization and say, I would love to collaborate with you on this behavioral health grant. I would love to collaborate with you on this EPA grant. I would love to collaborate on fill in the blank, because they know that you are an eligible lead entity. They would like to partner together because they think that they can help make you more competitive and also accelerate your impact in some way. That's awesome. Tricky, but awesome. It could also be that you, though, as a tribal organization, are looking at an opportunity and you're not sure if you are the best lead applicant, or you're not sure, or maybe you're pretty sure that you're not an eligible entity to apply on your own. Maybe it has to be a health department. It says it has to be a institution of higher ed. It says it has to be a K-12 school system. There are other organizational structures that different grant opportunities will say, this is the type of group we want to grant to. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be a part of their project, but it just means that, well, we're thinking now from the opposite side. Instead of people coming to you asking to collaborate, or you asking people to join you as you apply, now you might think about offering to be a partner on their grant. In this particular case, I've often said to organizations, especially if maybe they're thinking about federal funding for the first time or expanding their federal funding for the first time in a while, it is not a bad thing to be a subrecipient, a subgrantee on big funds like this. Sometimes it's nice to let a different organization be the lead applicant, take the lead on the application submission, on the legal liability of clicking submit, to take the lead on the required reporting. That's not a bad thing. It might be a great situation. So, but both of those scenarios, you being the lead or you being a partner to a different lead, they both fit into this very common reason that organizations would come together for a particular collaboration on an application. Some organizations may have an internal person that helps write grants. Not all will. So we often have to talk about not just how are we sharing the money, but how are we sharing the workload. Now, as I have described that particular interaction for organizations, I've just put a delineator in the chat. Could you let me know if this type of scenario seems like one that you might find your organization in, maybe if you're foreshadowing over the next year? Could you let me know what you think? It's not a firm commitment here, just a what do you think? Is this a collaboration scenario you could see yourself in as an organization over maybe the next year, next 12 months? Let me know with a Y for yes, N for no, question mark if you're not sure. So this scenario 1, there are still 4 other common reasons that organizations will come together to collaborate on a grant application. So let's see what you think of this next one. Sometimes grant professionals, I'm a grant professional, but you might say, I don't like that title. That's not my real title. It might be a grant writer, might be a development staff member who sometimes has to write grants. You might be the director of programs who sometimes has to write grants. The person who writes the grants in multiple organizations say we could come together and we think this could make for a more competitive application. So where is interagency collaboration? The first example is based on usually organizational leadership, program leadership, thinking about how can we best work together. Sometimes it's us, the writers, the facilitators of the applications that might say, you know, it would actually be best if we came together. We think that it would make it more competitive in this application process. They're only going to make 1 or 2 awards. If we see these groups collaborate, let's see if we can make that work. They're going to be more likely to get funded than if either of them or both of them go in by themselves. So the people doing the writing work, watching the industry best practices, watching what's happening in terms of award rates, they might be the ones to suggest the collaboration. When I describe that situation, how many of you think that that might be a collaboration scenario that you find yourself in maybe in the upcoming year? Again, no firm commitment, just trying to get a sense of which of the collaborations seem like they might be part of what you're considering. Don't you worry, there are still 3 more. If you haven't heard a type of collaboration that might be on the horizon for you and your organization, we still have more to go. And, you know, as I describe them, you might say, I don't know, I had not considered that kind. So that question mark or the maybe is always a great answer if you don't feel strongly one way or the other. All right, let's look at our third type of collaboration that is often coming about. So when we think about how organizations are operating, there is a lot that has changed in terms of service delivery since the pandemic. I'm one of those eternal optimists, glass more than half full. I'm always looking for the silver lining. And, you know, when I think about some of the tech changes that have helped just day-to-day efficiency even. Oh, curbside grocery pickup for somebody who lives in a super rural community. I'm like, I love the efficiency of just getting to do all my pickups in one time and not have to also go into the store. I love that things like that have stayed. I give that as a day-to-day real-world example of how some things that really became a big deal during the pandemic have stayed, even though we weren't sure they would. There are similar examples of what does that mean in terms of acceptance of telehealth and telecommuting and long-term collaborations. Nonprofit professionals, grant-seeking organizations, grant makers are much more used to, comfortable with, and accepting of different ways to approach how we work together in order to ultimately improve the outcomes experienced by those we serve. So as we think about the work that is in your community, I just gave you an example of how I am in a very rural community. I'm in far, far upstate New York, right by the St. Lawrence River, right where New York and Canada border, right by the Akwesasne Mohawk organization. And so when we think about how rural our community is, we don't always have all the resources that we might want. And so to think about inviting in a collaborator who might not have a physical presence right in the community, but have a wonderful set of skills or experiences that could help make our impact stronger for the community and also make us more competitive in the grant application is something that organizations are now able to consider that wasn't true before. Maybe you say, oh, we've got all the resources we need right here. And that's amazing. But I know firsthand, again, from being in a community that does not have all the resources it always needs, that being able to work in a more collaborative way over a bigger region, maybe a larger state area, can make applications more competitive. A very common example now is as different health systems are merging and forming collaborations, that's a very common now example of how there might be a lot of resources in one local health system, but for just a few things, they're getting a larger health system support from a different regional partner. So we're seeing more and more examples of what this might look like. I'm very curious. Let me put your delineator in the chat box. How many of you think that this might make sense for you as you consider your collaborations for the upcoming year? Go ahead and let me know in the chat box, please. Is this a, I think this could be a fit, or no, this one's not us? Or is it a, I'm not sure, I had not considered? Is it a question mark or a maybe? Still two more types of collaboration to go. As we think about your grant seeking work and what it is that you want to achieve in the next year, the next 18 months, the next 2 years, when you think of the different grant makers that you might want to expand to, new relationships, we are seeing some grant makers who are telling their applicants what types of collaborations they will require. So one example where we saw this was with a United Way. And they said all of the senior service providers in our metro area, it was covering 3 different counties, you will all come together and you will talk about how you will collaborate. And then we will talk about funding, what your proposed collaboration is. So they had to, as a group, they could choose not to come into the room. There was that option. But if you chose to come into the collaboration room and be part of the process, then you were going to come up with a group proposal that they would consider for funding. So yes, a little bit of an opt-in, but you're like, I want the money. So pretty much everybody went to the first meeting. Not everyone stayed for the whole conversation as it developed over the next few months. But that was kind of a funder forced collaboration. They wanted to see change in the community, and so they decided that that was the approach that was right for them. Was it right or not? But it was funder required. It is an example of that type of collaboration. On the other hand, there are grant makers who will give strong suggestions for the types of organizations that you should have involved. An example of this type where it is self-managed yet strongly funder required in terms of the types. 2 examples actually, both federal. One is from the Office of Violence Against Women. They have multiple funding programs that say you have to have these types of partners involved. And they tell you the type of organization. But within your own community, you might have multiple service providers that you would choose to collaborate with. But then they do also wrap their requirement by saying you must have a memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement, a legally signed document approved by your board in place and uploaded with your application, because they want to see how does this collaboration legally function. They're not telling you the who, they're giving you flexibility in that regard, but they say you must have these partners if you're going to apply, and if you don't, you will not even be reviewed. A similar example is with the CDC. They have the Drug-Free Communities program. It's been around for many years, and it has a long list for the types of organizations that should be involved with whatever community-based organization is the lead applicant. Perhaps some of you have been asked to be in drug-free community application processes for the CDC. They are long, extensive partner list for most of those applications. We worked on one and it had 19 different partner organizations. They had to make sure they met all of the requirements for the types of groups the CDC was expecting. And then they could also have some that were other things that were in categories that they felt also strengthened their application. So this 4th category, this is for funder required. Tells you kind of the who's going to be involved, what the community is. And then there's the funder They tell you you need to have partners. They tell you what kind, but they let you self-manage more about who kind of comes into that collaboration room. This is not something every organization encounters every year. It might be something that comes up every few years. So rather than ask you if you think this is going to happen to you, because, well, it would be more like I'd have to, this is from like the 1980s, right? I'd have to use my magic 8 ball to say, what do we think? Decidedly so. We wouldn't know. So instead, I'm curious to know how many of you have been part of or been exposed to a funder-driven collaboration. You as an organization, and it could be your current role, it could be a previous role. Let me know in the chat box, Y for yes, N for no, if you have been part of a grant application where it was a collaboration driven only initially by what the funder required. Now I have that initial phrase in that comment, because sometimes these collaborations, they might have a little bit in terms of already in place. Oh, we've already been working with this group. It'll be perfect. They fit the criteria exactly. Other times you're building brand new relationships. Just so, air quotes, you can go apply for the grant funding. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this type of collaboration, but I like organizations to think very long and hard about entering into collaborations for the first time only so they can go after grant money. Not that you're going to mission drift by applying for funding with this type of collaboration, but if this is not already the natural collaboration desired by your organization, it might put some undue stress on the organization in your grant seeking process. So I would think carefully with your leaders about if you want to apply for a partnership like this in order to receive grant funding. All right, we have one more type of grant collaboration. Now, this does again point back to the grant writer or the grant professional, the program individual on staff that wants to go after a new type of funding but hasn't done that type before. The reason some organizations will collaborate isn't about the money that's going to come into an organization necessarily, but rather because it can help upskill the staff. So, for example, NSF, National Science Foundation. That is a big, heavy lift of an application. Has anyone here ever worked on an NSF application before? I don't want to assume one way or the other. They often are coming out of folks who are doing research work, so principal investigators. They're coming out of institutions of higher ed a great deal of the time. Has anyone here, let me know in the chat box, Y for yes, N for no. Has anyone here worked on an NSF application, National Science Foundation? So, all right, I see that a number of you have not. But maybe, now this might be it might be a far-fetched example for your specific type of work, but maybe you say, Diane, no, but I want to. Or maybe you say, Diane, I really want us to go after a USDA grant this next year, or I really want us to go after an EPA grant. But none of us in the organization have written that type yet. I wonder if someone in my network would be willing to let me shadow them and support them in their process so I could learn about it and then use that to help make my application more competitive. It's not that you're taking their ideas, they're different programs, but each of these different funding programs, they have their own personality. They have their own unique approach from that funding agency that might make you competitive in a way you wouldn't expect. An example, SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services. There is a specific cadence and feel to those 10-page narratives. It's never enough. It's single-spaced. There's a feel to what their work plans should look like. There are some well-known little tips and hacks that people who do SAMHSA grants often have developed about how could I use a table to show my goals in a way that is easier for reviewers to read and takes less space than if I were to write it all out in narrative. These are things that those who have written SAMHSA grants are often willing to share as knowledge with others doing their first SAMHSA grants. I could give examples of that with different federal or large state programs. So while it's not about the money in this particular example of grant writing collaboration, someone who wants to have exposure to a particular type of application can offer to help, to edit, to be a sounding board, to maybe be a fresh set of eyes for a review before you submit, comparing an application against the guidelines. Those are all things that are helpful to a colleague in the network. It'll make their application more competitive. It also then helps to upskill you and therefore your organization to be ready for your potential application that you're interested in. So this is a space where, again, it's not about the money, but it is a form of grant writing collaboration, and it can be a way to prepare your organization to be even more successful. So last time I'm going to ask, because it's the last of our 5 types of collaboration, is this a type of collaboration that you could see yourself in the upcoming year? Y for yes, N for no, M for maybe, or a question mark if you're not sure. Now, when you think about how you find the opportunities like this, well, think about what your natural network is right now. Who is it that you know within the tribal organization community that is also writing grants? Are there folks here in the room that you know that you might want to talk to each other about it over email, on LinkedIn? If you're a member of the Grant Professionals Association, this is a very common thing that folks are talking about and connecting around in the grant zone, which is their online forum for communication. There are local Grant Professional Association chapters spread out around the United States. So maybe you look at that as a network, or you look at the Association of Fundraising Professional chapters and use that as a network. So if this is a spot where you could see yourself, I would start to kind of make it known. I'm looking to learn more about how to write Department of Justice grants. I'm looking to learn more about how to write, and let your network know. These grants don't come up all the time for organizations. There's usually just a few a year. So you want to make sure that your network knows, that your close circle of contacts know that you're looking to be in this sort of collaboration, and also maybe that you're going to offer. If there's a skill, a particular application you feel really comfortable in, that there's one you'd be willing to help people with too. So let's think about, we've got 5 different types of collaboration. I was not tracking who said yes to all or who said yes to just a few, who said no to all. It'll be different for each of you depending on what your year is designed to look like. What are you trying to secure for grant funding? And the year after that might look even more different as your grant strategy as an organization changes. Each year for each organization I work with looks very different for what collaboration means. Sometimes it's different because it might be a 3-year grant. So the formal, what is the collaboration and how does the budget get split and where's the memorandum of understanding? That might be a discussion that only happens every 3 years, because the rest of the time it's about doing the work, doing the real work that they got funded for and doing the reporting. So what it feels like for the collaboration also might feel different than from year to year. Now, I'm not sure if anyone is a Dilbert fan or not. Pulled back into my cartoon archives. When we think about building in time to work with partners about writing our application and what it feels like to do collaborative writing, you might say, sure, and like offer a time to get together. No, never, right? That's what this cartoon is telling us. And it questions whether or not the idea of collaborative writing can be successful. Now, I'm not saying that is the feeling you have, but I have heard similar angst and concern about collaborations, finding time for collaborations, about the effectiveness of writing together versus we'll write it as the lead applicant and we'll ask you if you approve. That's not the right type of collaboration that funders want to support. So I want to be transparent, though, and acknowledge that not all collaborations that are brought together in service of seeking grant dollars are great. Sometimes they are indeed really stressful, or sometimes, I'm going to say it, ugly. So what are some of the great things that happen when collaborations in the different categories of the 5 I shared, What are some of the things that are really good about it? New ways to engage with partners that benefit your community, that benefit those that you work with, those that you serve, new engagement opportunities. So more impact. Yes, that is the good, that is the best. Professional development, strengthening each organization's grant-seeking capacity, grant-seeking muscles, grant reporting skills and abilities. Also, fabulous. Some things that can go ugh, and be a little yuck. Someone call it the bad. People don't always feel comfortable sharing the budget, sharing the spotlight. I'm not saying that's your organization. I'm just saying some of the things we have seen. There are some organizations that feel that it is best for them to be the lead applicant. That is where they are comfortable. They don't want to be a subrecipient. They don't want to be a subgrantee. That's the discretion of the leaders of the board or the advisory committee. We have seen it happen. Not great, but you're not going to usually change someone's mind. Something else that I would call the bad as it relates to collaborations is a collaboration that in some way makes the mission of the organization feel like it's drifting a little bit in service of being part of a collaboration. So you want to come to a collaboration with a strong why. Why are we doing this? Why does this feel connected to our mission, our purpose, our vision? And the ugly is, well, if there's a reason that you lose funding because of a collaboration, or it does start to feel competitive, yeah, that's not great. For the most part, we don't see a lot of the ugly. There's too much passion and focus in organizations doing great work to get too distracted and to end up in some of those negative scenarios. When folks come together with strong intentions about their why for what they want to collaborate about, we find lots of stories that fit into the green, the good. But it takes a lot of hard work by both or all, depending on how many organizations you have, to not drift into some of the yucky, blue, bad stuff on the screen. So what I want to help you to think about now is that regardless of which of those 5 different types of collaboration you might be engaged in over the next year or so, how is it that you will help to facilitate that process so that your experience is in that green good spot? So we're going to talk about some tools and some collaboration techniques. So you can think about how to make these situations as stress-free as possible in your organization. I say as stress-free. I'm not saying it's going to be like the red easy button for Staples. Collaborations rarely are that simple, but we want to make them as stress-free as possible. So as we think about tools, some of this is about facilitation tools. Some of it might feel like a tech suggestion. It is not a single software solution, unfortunately. But I want to give you a few different ideas for what's going to be in your toolbox for collaborative applications. We'll start by thinking about how you interact and who is going to interact. We have to think about who is going to be the leader of this collaboration. Who is the formal voice? This is both in terms of whose organizational name is the lead, the one that shows up on the form, the one that's going to show up in the grant award notice. Once you get the funding, we need to decide who that's going to be. We want to think about the different roles that different organizations and different individuals within the organizations will play. We want to think about how we're going to hold each other accountable to those timelines that we set, maybe for an application that's due in 3 months, knowing that we all still have the rest of our work to do. We all still have very full plates. So how are we going to set some accountability measures and some structure to ensure that the work continues to move forward and is done on time, if not early? We want to figure out what tools we're going to use for how we share, how we interact. And as we think about what are the things we will measure and mark our success on, define our success by, how will we determine what those are? So to help us do that, I'm going to give you some very specific ideas here in a moment about a technique. I'm going to show you, I've got a special handout for you in your course materials that are related to that. But before I show you, a few other thoughts about how we want to set the stage. Whether you call them founding documents, charter documents, I'm going to introduce the phrase team working agreement to you in a few minutes, collaborative working agreement. We need to understand, have shared understanding, have shared agreement around how are we going to work together. Working together as two organizations? All right, well, that's two sets of normal rules and ways we interact that now have to figure out how will we do that together. 3 organizations, 4 organizations, 19, like that CDC example I gave. Wow. There are a lot of different ways that organizations are successfully approaching these same things. How will we decide on how we as a collaboration will work together? Sometimes what helps to drive this conversation is what does the guideline say? What is the NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability, or the RFP, Request for Proposals, or FOA, Funding Opportunity Announcement? So the instructions, the guidelines. What does the document say? In that CDC example, it was very clear that it has to be a community-based organization as the lead. So that took out some of the required partners. That took out the K-12 education folks. That took out the police department. That took out the local municipality. It took out the hospital and healthcare system. They were partners. They were required types of partners, but they were not going to be the defined allowable applicant of the community-based organization. So sometimes this leadership discussion and the process discussion might be led by what do the guidelines tell us for who it has to be? And maybe the group will decide to defer to the leadership organization and their ongoing style, their ongoing rules. We've seen that happen. Sometimes we have seen collaborations that have asked their partners to share their strengths in different ways. They might, once the folks are in the room that are going to partner, we've seen folks share their Myers-Briggs types. We have seen folks share their Strengths Finder results. I wonder if I have that book. Yep. Oh, right here. Because I was trying to think of who the author was. Tom Rath with Strengths Finder. I have seen collaborative organizations take the time to say, everyone, please, you don't have to read the whole book, please take the quiz with Strengths Finder. Okay, that works. In the upskilling, that 5th of the 5 different types of collaboration, we have seen organizations that have looked at the GPC, the Grant Professional Credential, and looked at the self-assessment of skills so that people can understand what are they bringing to the table as they're trying to help each other upskill. And then lastly, and honestly, one of my favorites, it is less formal, it's more flexible for how it works in different groups, is the idea of the team working agreement that I'm going to walk you through in just a moment. Now, part of the decision for what's on the screen, how do we decide and understand who's in the room and what are their strengths, their skills, their competencies? Really about your organizational culture and maybe your existing relationships with a collaborative partner, or if you are all brand new to each other, for how much learning you might feel should be done in order to work on an application together. As we think about who is in the room, who's at the table, who's on the Zoom line, the competencies, the skills, the backgrounds, you want them to be as unique and cross-functional as possible. We don't want, now maybe in the initial conversation, we want all the leaders in the room to agree this is what we're going to do. But when we really are talking about collaborative grant applications, we need a variety of skills. We need someone who loves to really look at that budget information. And we need someone who loves talking about program design documents, logic models, and work plans. We need someone who is going to be super attuned to writing the most concise response, whether it is character counted or an overall page limit. We need all sorts of different skills from our collaborative partners in order to make our application as strong as possible. So how do we figure out who's in the room and set some of these ground rules? So this is where the team working agreement idea, I think, is a great item to have in your facilitation toolbox. Now let me show you, I've got it on a slide in a moment, but I want to highlight that in your course materials, don't go now because it'll drop you. So later on, when you go back and you click on that red bar on the left-hand side, you'll be able to also have this team working agreement that'll be available to you. Now, as I come back, there we go, back to our slides. This is what it looks like inside that handout. And I'm going to walk you through how we will create it. This can be done digitally. It can be done in person. It does not need to look like this. This happens to be the structure that my particular team enjoys using the most. We've tried a number. This one, very basic, helps facilitate these ideas and come to shared understanding with a wide range of groups. But again, lots of other options. If you go into a search engine and you type in team working agreement, I'm sure you will come up with other structures that you might like to use. Now, you can do this, as I said, in person, on a wall, lots of sticky notes that people can put their ideas up, or you certainly can take this and put it into any whiteboard tool and use it electronically. In fact, I'm going to type a web address into your chat box. Mural, M-U-R-A-L, is a virtual limitless whiteboard tool. And the reason I put that particular tool in, yes, Zoom has a whiteboard tool, and there's a Post-it whiteboard tool, and a lot of project management tools have whiteboard tools. Mural, the reason I talk about it is that they give free licenses to nonprofit organizations, grant-seeking groups like yourself. And so that's kind of cool to be able to say, I know it's a tool you could use for free if you're trying to do this virtually. All right, well, what would it look like if we were facilitating? By the time we're done, we want to end up with a bunch of different sticky notes giving us some shared understanding. So we're going to zoom in on these different sections together. We will zoom in first on purpose. So yes, that heart-centered item right in the middle. Why is the collaborative group coming together? Oh, that's right. We're coming together because we want to write a competitive application together. We want to bring the money into our community so we can do this great work. Okay. You could certainly be more specific. It might be, we are coming together to write a highly competitive OVW grant for a new project. We're coming together to write for a targeted capacity expansion grant for substance use disorder services in our community. We are coming together to write a collaborative application around telehealth and distance learning technology. You could be very specific. For this one, we're saying it's very broad. We want to come together and we want to find some money together. In the upper left-hand corner, let's zoom in there next. We want to secure funding for the community project. Again, you could be as specific as you currently know. Is it about opening a new mental health clinic in your community? Is it about giving new career class opportunities to students in your local schools by connecting with folks a few hours away in your state? You can be as generic or as specific as possible in the moment. What are the reasons? So you might have more than one sticky note for what are the goals that you're trying to achieve together. In this instance, we have one. As we walk through, I'm going to move us into our upper right-hand corner of this team working agreement, and that is roles and skills. So once the organizations have decided to work together, who's in the room to help get this thing across the finish line? So I've called out 3 different theoretical collaborative team members' skills. Jana said, I love logic models. When we get to the point where we're going to draft one and then finalize it for an attachment in the application, I am so excited to help lead that part of the project. To which everyone should say, yes, thank you, that's fantastic. All right, and Jane Jane raises her hand and says, I have my tracking pen ready. Whether we're in Google Drive or SharePoint, or if I'm physically printing it out, I am ready when it's time to read the entire thing top to bottom and give it a strong copy edit before we think about a final review. Yes, all right, thanks, Jane, that's fantastic. And Maggie speaks up and says, listen, I love talking about SMART objectives. In fact, did you hear that we're now talking about them more as SMARTY objectives than SMART objectives? And everyone else in the room goes, you like writing SMART objectives? Yes. Good. All right. Thanks. You're here and paying attention to the changes in that space. So happy to have you. And so we find out what are the different skills, the things that people like or feel comfortable with as we think about how to make the application as competitive as possible. Now, let's pretend for a moment that you're in that space. I'm the one facilitating this time, so don't worry, you don't have to do it. But you are a collaborative team member and you're thinking about the roles and skills. What would you put in that spot for yourself? I want you to think about this. It might feel uncomfortable. It's kind of like a humble brag. What would you say is the skill or the passion that you're bringing to your collaborative grant team that you want to put in the roles and skills spot? Go ahead and type that into the chat box for me. Let's see what we have. I'm guessing we're going to get a lot of different variation in your roles and skills. So what would you want to put next to your name for what you're bringing to the collaboration? I only gave a few examples. Be as creative and diverse in your answers as you would like. Maybe you even want to say, my skill is facilitation. My skill is kind of keeping the room nice and calm, bringing an occasional punny joke to help keep things light when it gets tense about money. Whatever you want to put. I'm going to let you type in those roles and skills for a moment, and then we'll check out and see the awesome skills you're bringing to your collaborations. Once we have that set, what's in the room? Who is bringing what special skill? What role might they play? Then we can think about what are the shared values that are going to be important to us. They might tie to the values that are in your organizational strategic plans and your visioning documents. They might be newly generated words and ideas for this particular collaborative group. So if we were pretending that you are the collaborative group, it could be that as you talk about your organizations and the work you do and how you want to work together, you've decided that openness, transparency, and inclusion are the three values that you want at the forefront of everything you do together in service of this application. Awesome. All right, now let's go back though real quick to those roles and skills. I want to see what you put in the chat box. Editing, lots of editing. Storytelling, narrative, research, best practices, like the recorder, clerk of the works, project management, narrative, organization, administrative documents. Yes, high five, everyone. That's fantastic. You want to make sure that when you're facilitating that there are people with other skills in the room in addition to what you have put. You want it to be as diverse and robust in terms of having a cross-functional team as possible so that it is an equaler sharing of the workload as you think about this collaborative application. Now let's look at that bottom right-hand corner. This is the last portion of our team working agreement. And quite frankly, actually, I was talking about this in a workshop on Tuesday. And I put this up on the screen and I explained it. And the first comment, I didn't even ask a prompt in the chat. I explained what it was. I'll do that in a second. And one of the participants said, oh, man, this would have saved a lot of arguments in my last collaborative application. And I was like, okay, so hopefully this works in the future. So here it is, rules and activities. When we think about Organization A and the way that they operate together and their technology policies and their systems, and then we think about Organization B and we think about their way of working and their organizational practices and tools and policies, it is rare that those are exactly the same thing. Like so rare, I would wager that they're not the same. I feel comfortable saying that. So here, let's test the theory. In the chat box, could you please tell me where would you prefer to do collaborative writing with a team? Google Drive, SharePoint, Dropbox, VPN server, other tech that is not coming to mind for me right now. Go ahead and tell me in the chat, if you got to pick, where do you want to do your collaborative writing? All right. Oh, so Google Drive is winning for the moment, but not all of you have said Google Drive yet. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. We got a strong Google Drive representation today. I never know what happens when I ask that. But we know at least one of you is like, oh, my IT people told me I have to leave everything on SharePoint. I'm not allowed. We've got to work out, what are the policies? What can live where? Are we allowed to have any of your organization information on a drive? Sometimes, especially with healthcare organizations, behavioral health focused organizations, there are some strong protocols for why an IT policy has one versus the other. We've got to work it out. Now's a good time to figure it out before anybody gets in trouble with IT. Okay, when should we meet? How often, if we're working on a big federal application, how often as partners would you like to meet? We have a theoretical 3 months, 90 days. It's a lot of time for a federal grant, but I'm doing it. You have 90 days for a federal grant. How often would you like to meet as a collaborative group? Go ahead, let me know in the chat box. What is your theoretical answer? If you were part of a collaborative, you had 90 days for a federal grant, how often would you like to meet? Oh, and if you want to tell me where you want to meet. Do you want to meet on Teams? Do you want to meet on Zoom? Do you want to meet in person? Do you want to meet on GChat? What else do I have for platforms? I'll stop there. Or if there's other platforms you want to meet on. All right, seeing a lot of weekly. Oh, Jessica, thank you. You gave us some time boxing as well. You would like to meet for 2 hours every week. Twice weekly was a suggestion. I've got some folks who want to be in Teams. I have some who want Zoom or in person. I have some who want Google Meets. We better decide up front what's going to work. Is there anyone that can't, like physically cannot get into a Teams room? Their IT won't let it happen. Or they physically they just cannot get into a Google Meet from their work computer. We have to ask these questions. We don't want to have a key partner, especially if it's the logic models partner. We don't want to have them locked out of our rooms. And, well, who's going to submit? Now you might say, Diane, isn't that a technical question? It is. Thank you so much. Yes, it is a technical question. When we're talking about who is the lead applicant is the one that is legally liable, especially with federal grants, to click submit. Their authorized organization representative, AOR, is legally the one that has to submit. But there's a lot that happens before that submit button gets pushed. So what is it that we're saying will be our approval process before that lead applicant pushes submit? Now, I'm assuming it's a push submit instead of like a carry the binder to the post office or the FedEx office. But true story, there is a New York State housing process that still is hard copy in a binder. Anyway, I won't get derailed on that story, but just say that most of the time, right, we're talking about submission. So what is the process? What are the steps that the collaborative group agrees will be taken so that each organization has said, yes, check the box, I'm good to go? Better to set that now than when we're a few hours from actually clicking submit. What would you think is one of the most important rules for your organization? You don't have to give me like what's the tech or what, but can you make it generic for me? What would be one of the most important things that you want to know if you're going to lead a facilitation around a collaborative grant application? What is something that you want to know up front? Are there other things that you want to know that I've not already asked? If so, I'd love to hear in the chat box. You might say, I want to know, are people coffee drinkers, tea drinkers, water drinkers? If we're in person, it's important that I know what to have laid out for our 2-hour meetings. You might say, I really want to know how we're going to communicate as a group. Are we texting because we're on different platforms? Are we only doing email? Are we doing reply alls? Is that us? Are we doing like some sort of special like Teams chat page on a wiki somewhere? I'm making up some tech examples. Are we doing it as like a listserv thing so people just need to remember one generic big list name and then it gets to everyone? Like, how are we doing it? We don't want to accidentally leave a partner. Oops, I'm so sorry. I left you off that email. Really important executive director. Oh, I'm so sorry. So these rules, it's not that we need a bunch. Probably need 4 or 5. If you get to 10, you should stop. That's an important. If you get to 10 rules and activities for your collaborative group, too many. Time to get out. But like 4, 5, 6, great. These are kind of the rules of the road for how we're going to work together. And not that I think you're going to have an argument about any of these things, but things can get sticky. It's likely to reduce the stress of everyone involved. So as we think about that team working agreement, I'm curious, how many of you have ever participated in a facilitated process like that for a collaboration before? Let me know in the chat box. Y for yes and for no. It's not fancy. It's basic as a structure. And I see, yes, some of you have done it. Taking the time to do it is what takes some more discipline for the organizations that are going to be in the collaboration, making it something that happens very, very early on. Maybe it's not like the first thing you do, because the first thing you do is talk about the guidelines and agree on kind of, do we really think this is a good idea? If yes, next we'll do a team working agreement. This takes 30 minutes, maybe. Might take a little bit longer. I was in a collaboration with a large metropolitan city down south, and they were working on some terrorism preparation grant applications. 40 organizations in the room. They weren't all at the same level of engagement in the application. We didn't need all 40 to be part of the team working agreement. We needed the core 6 groups to have the team working agreement. And for the rest, the other, 34, to know where did they fit into the process. But they weren't in the budget. They weren't at every meeting. But good to tell them up front. You 34, here's what we're asking of you. You 6, you're the key players. You're going to be in a team working agreement because you're working together all the time. So it also helps make it clear for different organizations, what is my role? How much am I putting into this application in terms of effort? Some folks might say, oh, you want me to meet every week for 2 hours and we might get $5,000 out of this grant? I'm not sure that's worth it. It makes people ask questions about their engagement, their potential return on investment. It might shake loose some of the money questions early on. So let's pretend that you have found yourself in a situation where a collaborative grant application has come forward. It seems like it could be a good fit. Leadership has agreed we want to be part of it. There's at least one other organization involved, maybe more. So we've talked about the guidelines. Everybody says thumbs up. We're going to keep going. And we do a team working agreement with the key partners. Great. Now we have an understanding of who's around and going to help, some of our rules. How are we going to get from today to submission day? I have a rule as a team, and it's a good practice, but in our team, it's a rule. We don't submit with organizations on the day of the deadline. Something has to have gone very wrong. A snowstorm, an IT outage, no, because too much can go wrong on the day of the deadline. Just like I said, snowstorm, IT outage, somebody's sick. So the project management is never about planning to submit, especially a collaborative grant with moving pieces, is never about submitting the grant on the day of the deadline. It is all about how do we plan to submit early. Now, how many days early? Okay, you can debate. We like to keep track of our averages for the number of days in advance. The more the merrier when it comes to these big, big grants. 6, 7, 8. It's possible and it's awesome. Very stress-free. But how do we do this project management? A few of you said when you were talking about the roles and the skills that you would put on your team working agreement, a few of you said project management. That's my second professional passion. I love talking about agile ways of working. On the screen, I have a few different types of tools that sometimes get used for project management. I'm curious from all of you, not just those of you that said project management in the chat, how is it that you manage what work you have to do? Is it your personal calendar, Google or Outlook, and like a task list? Is it something like Monday.com? Is it something like Asana or Trello or Basecamp or ClickUp or Jira? I'm listing a lot. I'm tool agnostic. There are a lot of fantastic tools that exist. I'm going to show you a few. Something that you might find in the collaboration is that what a team might bring in terms of roles and skills is an awesome tool for helping multiple people see visual elements of the work at one time. Because the problem with any of our personal calendars, as much as we might use them as our to-do list, it might help us think about what we're prioritizing for our day, unless we're inviting everybody in the collaboration to that particular calendar item, it's only visible to us. And I might say, oh, but Diane, I have a shared calendar. Okay, so then people in your organization can see it. We're going to have all sorts of problems if we start sharing it across like Google calendars to Outlook calendars and what subscribes and what updates. It gets wonky. So one example is Monday.com. People can invite collaborative partners in and they can see all of the different tasks and who's doing what and where is it in status. So even in between these weekly meetings, whether they're an hour or two, everyone could see where is the project status. Asana, same type idea. How could we invite folks in to make the work visible? If someone already has a subscription, especially if it's the lead applicant, has a subscription to any of these tools or anything like these tools and can invite an external partner, it might also give you the answer to where do we link documents. It might give you an answer to where do we talk, because some of them have embedded chat features. So it doesn't matter that somebody's on Google and somebody's on Microsoft. If you're allowed to use a tool like this, it might give you the space where you can also have some asynchronous communication without flooding inboxes. It might be something like Trello. I'm putting a few up here just so that you can see these different types of visual virtual project management. They make it incredibly helpful when you have folks that are distributed, not all in one location, which is so common for collaborative applications, so that people can see how are we doing. Our stakeholders can tell, oh, we're progressing. In this example on the screen, you could see what do we still have to do. Here's the list of things we still have to do as a team to get this application out the door. Here are the things that we currently are working on as a team. Hey, kudos, pat on the back. Here's the stuff we already completed. Now everyone in the collaboration can see what is still left on our to-do list. This is a picture of Basecamp. This looks a lot more like a calendar, doesn't it? Well, if you've noticed, I've been showing different types of views and the different types of tools. They actually all can be made to look the same, like slightly different coloring and structure and rounded tech boxes, but they all can show you things in a list view and they can all show you things in what they call a Kanban view, to do, doing, done. They can all show you something in a calendar view or a dashboard. They can all show you what everybody has to do versus what you have to do. That's part of the benefit of tools like this when you're facilitating a collaboration, is that different people visualize their work differently. And so being able to filter and sort across different organizations that have different styles, but still everyone has access to all of the same information about our different elements, is an incredible time saver and an efficiency hack for you if you're the one facilitating the process. Now, sometimes when I talk project management, folks will get very excited about more traditional project management techniques. Usually these are referred to as waterfall, where you plan out each and every step of the entire application, like on the screen right now, and you have fixed dates for when it will start and when it will end. And so you have a very clean, crystal clear plan of how you will get from today to the day you submit. Now that is a best laid plan. I'm curious, have any of you ever had anything go slightly different than expected when working on a grant application? Y for yes, N for no. A key partner in the programs department was out sick unexpectedly. Somebody was at a conference. The office was closed because of some sort of weather issue. Okay, I see not all of you have had something not go as planned. For those of you that haven't had it happen yet, spoiler, it'll happen at some point. But I see that for the majority of you, you're like, yep. So the issue, I don't want to say a problem, the issue for you, if you set up this beautiful timeline of everything that will happen in perfect order, the odds are incredibly high that something will not go quite as planned. You'll get something a little late, and it will have a cascading effect on all of your dates. So now you have to spend time updating all of your dates in order to make sure that it's still current and that it reflects what's really going to happen versus what was your best laid plan at the beginning. So what I encourage you to consider, it's not about what tool you use. Nope, not that at all. I encourage you to have something that is shared, that is accessible by all partners, so they can see what is it we have to do and how are we doing progressing towards completion. And it is the least, but yet most responsible level of planning, knowing that you're going to have to respond to change over following the plan perfectly. So what is just the right level of planning in terms of dates and structure so that you don't have to spend a lot of time updating things over and over and over as things get a little bit different. Either you're ahead or you're behind. Now, one of our favorite things to think about in our team is about how few clicks can we get folks into a document for. And when we say that, I'm thinking about collaborative partners coming from different systems. How fast can we get someone into where they're supposed to be? Whether it's because we want them to fill out this staffing table. And so like the HR team or the people's team is like, I know Diane asked me for something. Where was that file? Where was I supposed to be giving information about these new staff? Or I know, this is the vice president of program I'm pretending to be now. They're like, I know Diane asked me somewhere to start drafting our work plan in this particular template. Where was that? Let's see. Okay, I think it's in this folder. And if I see how it, right, folks will get frustrated and lost. That's not a good use of their time. So when we're thinking about our collaborative tools, whichever one you decide on in your team working agreement, tool agnostic, whatever the team decides for the collaborative application is what we will make work. The structure that I highly recommend you consider, because you're going to be interacting together for a while, right? You're going to have different drafts, going through different versions. You're going to get from, we think we're going to do it. It's like the backlog of the things we have to do. We're going to have a plan for how we get through it. And then we're going to have multiple iterations until we click submit. That's what this image shows. What we like to have is something called a project digest. Where can we put the key action items, even if we're using a project management tool that the collaborative group can see? The project digest is something that we have within the description in the tool. It is something that any partner can bookmark and save. It is the one spot that they can get to without having to log into anything else. That is our goal. How can we make it so that click one is opening some sort of web browser, Chrome, Internet Explorer, whatever the option might be. And then to type in or to click on the bookmarks so you get to the project digest. Now, sometimes, yes, there's like a tech reason. Maybe it's one extra click. So maybe we're at 3. But I want collaborative partners to be able to see, here are the key things we're waiting on right now that we're expecting of people. Here's the links to the key documents that everyone should be able to access. I want them all in one spot. Don't make your collaborative partners stress about where are they supposed to be, what are we supposed to be reading. That way, as we move through, now something that'll happen, used to happen a lot. I should say it doesn't happen as often now. But remember, I've been doing grants for more than 2 decades. I used to see this all the time. Emailed versions with different dates and different initials. Let me put a little delineator in the chat box. Whether it was about grants or other types of work, has anyone ever had that happen where it's about things that have been emailed as attachments? And so different people have put their initials and there's different dates. And what you are left to do for your work, whether grants related or not, is to consolidate all of the feedback from all of the documents and try not to lose track of version control. Has that happened to anyone else over the years? I have both I'm like, oh, there's a little bit of trauma as I think about what that used to be like. We don't want to have that happen. And even with the cool tools and the different collaboration options for writing, if we're not careful, it still could happen today. So one other recommendation is because wherever you agree to draft has the version history built in, instead of ever changing the link to your main documents. I would, if I go to my narrative, I'm going to use this as a narrative example for a moment. If we're thinking about the main body of our application, the narrative responses, I'm going to call it my first version, my V1, my draft. Means I'm here, means I've just got like the layout. What are the questions? What are the structure, the headings? Maybe I know a little bit of information. But that link, this document, even if I change the name of the document, what is linked in my project digest stays the same. So I never risk as I go from like my first initial draft to my second, where I've put in a lot of information. I'm asking some questions of partners in the comments. The link is exactly the same. I never want to lose a partner who's trying to help contribute their meaningful information. I might choose to change the name so that they can see this is a second version that they're in. Still the same link. I might add the date so they know this is the current thing that I'm in. Oh yeah, this is today's date. Good, I'm in the right place. Not, why does this say October 4th? That's an old version, right? I want to avoid and minimize those unnecessary questions. So if I'm updating the dates as we're working in the document, if we're using a drafting cadence, letting people know, okay, V2, when it's ready, when we think that this could go like, and somebody could do a grammar edit, once the edit's done, let's call it V3. Now we're down to like literally just fine tuning comments, trying to get stuff ready. And because this is a big collaborative government grant, we're going to try and get it ready for a mock review. Now, I have talked about mock reviews with the Native Learning Center before. I think we might talk about it a bit more in the upcoming year. It's a common thread for things I talk about with big applications before we submit. But so for mock review, we'd be saying, all right, we're ready for people who didn't help write it, to read it and compare it against the guidelines. So, but it's the same link. We're not doing anything different with it. We can just now let those reviewers into the same link. And if partner A came in and partner B came in, they would be able to tell, oh yeah, still same link. We got our review going on. And then as we're getting ready to finalize it, same link. We could just say V4 parentheses final. Change the date. It's the date we're going to submit. We're not actually going to upload the Google Doc anyway. We're going to take it out as a PDF, put it into grants.gov, put it into the state portal. But that live Google document has now been named final on the date. Our partners could still always see it. And also go back into that same version history that you can see for how did we get to where we are. If anybody had questions, they're not going to restore it and go back, but they can see it. It's there. So you've got the breadcrumb trail of how did your narrative or whatever document get to where it is now. And by doing that, by taking something like a project digest structure, making it as easy, as low resistance as possible for your partners to get into the key documents and thinking about how to keep them there, how to make it as easy as possible for them to contribute in between those weekly meetings that you have indicated you'd like to have. How can we keep things moving so that we are submitting in advance? Because you've already talked about submitting during your team working agreement, by the time you get towards submission, you know who's authorized to submit. Hopefully you did check their calendar to make sure that they are not out of the office. By planning to submit early in case they happen to be out unexpectedly ill or have a different personal matter that keeps them from being available, it's okay. Still have a few days. You've got a little buffer that you built into your calendar. It'll be all right. We'll still get there. You want to make sure, again, and I want to say this because we've seen this slow some things down, cause some issues with submission. You need to make sure that the person has the authority to submit, that they are approved through the entire SAM.gov, grants.gov system. If you're in the federal process, different states have different requirements for what pre-qualification looks like. In New York State, there's this system called SFS. I couldn't even tell you what it stands for today. And it is a newer application portal. And there's all sorts of debacle happening for applicants about, wait, who can actually, like, they don't have the authorization to click the button. Who does? And organizations are being stressed with that because it's a new system and they're still figuring out who's registered and where and with what level of like authority in the system. You don't want that to happen on the day of. So we want to make sure that they're available and that we know they've logged in, they can see it, they're going to be able to click the button. That takes the stress out of then our submission. Once you submit, oh, please do celebrate. Now, here's what I'd love to hear from you in the chat box. How, in collaborations, would you like to celebrate milestones? Maybe it's that maybe you want to celebrate earlier than even submission. Maybe you want to celebrate that you got your logic model completed and agreed on. Maybe you want to celebrate that you got your MOU written and signed by everybody. Yes, celebrate when you click submit. And of course, when you get the award, celebrate then. But I'd like to encourage you to celebrate within your collaborative application scenarios along the way. So does anyone have an example of where and how they have celebrated before that they think they might want to do in a collaborative group? It could be something as small, seemingly small, as dinging yellow smiley bells online. That's what our team likes to do with Zoom. We make sure all of the organizations we work with have one. And then that way, when something great happens, we can ding the bell online, not just at the time of award, but along the way. So if you have any little celebration things that you like, that you think might work in a collaborative setting as well, I'd love to hear about them. I'm always gathering ideas because different groups, different cultures, different practices for how we can celebrate. Doesn't have to be expensive, doesn't have to be long. I once worked with a team when something good happened. They kept a happy playlist on Spotify, and they would all go off camera and have like a little dance party or not, just listen to the music, but they would all go off camera and listen to the one song and then return to whatever they were doing. Worked for them. So lots of flexibility for what celebration looks like. But what I find is that collaborative teams, actually any grant team, internal or collaborative, often forget to celebrate along the way and only celebrate for awards. And there's so much other great stuff that's happening that you should be celebrating, especially if you have really got a group together that's working on a collaboration for applications and doing it well. Oh, deserves a lot of celebration. All right, well, and there is nothing wrong with celebrating with some sleep and some self-care. I can't be mad about that, Jessica. I think that's fantastic. But also, Kenny, yes, please, the next time, we'd all like to come to the potluck. Absolutely. Be right there. Sounds good. Ooh, and Edlin, breakfast. Now I'm hungry. All right, well, we'll move on from the celebrations because you've all made me hungry with your suggestions. Let's look at a few quick examples together to think about what else could we try. So in this example, it was a large healthcare system in Florida, one grant professional on staff, multiple federal applications happening simultaneously. They were bringing in different consultants for different parts of these huge processes. What do? We got different states, lots of different partners. Right? We need to figure out who's in charge. Who's going to be the one that really everybody's looking to lead this? Who's going to be facilitating? How are we going to make sure all of this work gets done? This is first a leadership question, second a big project management concern. We know we're going to rely heavily on tech. So who's going to be the one to like gather everybody together, get all the information? They decided it was going to be the grant writer's role. They were going to have all sorts of, they decided they did like Gantt charts, which is traditional project management. So they planned and they planned and they planned on dates. It ended up changing along the way. And then they said, well, here you are assigned to this and you are assigned to that and you are assigned to this. So it was very clear what each person was responsible for along the way. In a second example, we saw an organization. This time we were in Ohio. There was a project called Future of Toledo. Multiple organizations, 14 different priorities to get funded. Wow. There were a lot of concerns over power. And so they again looked to the grant writer as the external facilitator, because when they thought about who's in charge, who's responsible, how will they handle all these different players, what they decided was that they wanted someone who was impartial, someone that could help facilitate and not have some sort of particular concern. And that way, the different CEOs in the process didn't feel like they were fighting over power. Understanding, though, the background of who was in the room, what were the different skills, we needed the team working agreement to understand who was helping and how were they helping. This example, you heard me talk about a little bit already. Lots and lots and lots of players. It wasn't just about the municipality. They had to decide who was going to be the voice. In this case, being the voice was not for the grant writer, the grant professional. As they thought about the questions of who's in charge and how are we going to figure out who has which skills at the table, they wanted to understand who's going to get some money, who are the players. And so it was the individual who led their emergency management department was the one to figure out, all right, everybody, here's how we're going to play together in the sandbox. Here's who's going to get some money. Here's who's going to be the second tier. You don't have to come to the meetings. We need your support for this project to work, but we know you're not going to get any money, and so we're going to have you stay outside the process. This group here, you're going to do the hard work. You're also going to get some of the money when we have our work plan all set. There is not one perfect answer. And so I hope that part of what I've shown you today is that there are different approaches with each new collaboration to consider about how is it that we work together for this application to be the most successful possible. How is it that we think about what are the strengths in this group, in this room? Unless it's exactly the same players, all the same staff, all the same organizations, and neither has changed. Leadership, board members, strategy, programs, if literally nothing has changed since you worked together, because maybe it was like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, it's important to talk about then what are the current strengths in the room and what might or might not be the different capacity differences between the different collaborative partners, either in terms of resources, overall staff, the technology. There will be differences between the organizations. And so we need to understand who is it and how are we going to work together. And so when we think about our organizational cultural differences, there are many to consider. But when we work together, ultimately, what should happen is that we raise more money together for our organization, that we're able to say, yes, we did it. We got the $10.1 million grant. True story. We got the $20 million grant. Another true story. We got the $3.75 million grant. Different true story. Different organizations coming together for different reasons, but all taking time to think about, why are we coming together? How are we going to work together? And then let's do the work together. Those were the basic steps that all of the stories I've shared today followed, which is why I helped outline it this way. But I'd love to hear what questions you have. You can always email me a question afterwards, but if you want to type a question into the chat now, that is totally fine. I'm here to answer them. Yes, I have a very bad cold. I'm still my office puppy. I'm sorry. I've tried very hard not to cough into your ear either. So, yeah, not a good week in the office around here, but still always fun to talk about collaborative applications. If you don't want to email questions, there's lots of social media ways to ask me questions too. Happy to answer there if you prefer. And Brooke has just dropped the survey into the chat. Really appreciate your feedback so that we can always focus on improving the content that we deliver to you. But I'll keep an eye out on questions. But Brooke, back to you.
All right. Ooh, I think I'm on mute. There we go. All right. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation, Diane. Your webinars are always so incredible. As Diane said, folks, I did drop the link to today's webinar feedback survey into the chat. If you don't mind taking a moment to complete that for us, lets us know what's working well, what we can improve upon, and we do share that feedback with our instructors. We hope you can join us for our next webinar. This is going to be next week on the 29th. This is the fourth and final part of the mitigating hazards, preparing for and responding to emergencies and recovery strategies. So this will wrap up that webinar series. The webinar times are the same as always. So 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. Since those of you who are here on the webinar, since you're already on the platform, there's not going to be any need to register for this individual webinar. You will just log into the platform at the time the webinar is occurring, and you'll see that big green banner at the top, and you can join in that way. You can access our recorded webinars. It's now going to be on our YouTube channel and our Cathedra webinar archive. The link is here, and I have also put it in the shared notes, and I will put it into the chat right now as well. Oops. Just close the chat. Sorry, guys. Still getting used to the new system. There we go. All right. Please check out our upcoming events. You can find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We have our in-house produced podcast, the Hope of Being a Native American podcast. You can listen to that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Simplecast. And if you prefer to watch the video interviews with our guests, you can find those on our YouTube channel as well. But thank you guys so much for joining today. I hope that everybody has a fantastic rest of their week. I'm going to keep it open for a moment in case there's anybody else typing in questions, but this is exciting seeing all of you on here. I'm so happy everybody was able to access the webinar okay, because I know we're all still getting used to this new system. So make sure if you are having any kind of issues joining, or you're having any kind of issues finding a webinar that you think is supposed to be going on right then, you can always email us for help. I'm putting my email into the chat right now. And that resource item that Diane had shared, that is in the actual course here on the site. And then a copy of today's presentation slides is available through the link I'm about to post onto the chat. All right, it doesn't look like anybody's typing, so I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar. But I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of their day. Thank you again, Diane. Always incredible. And everybody have a fantastic rest of your weekend, guys. We will talk again soon. And then again, the webinar recording for today is going to be posted into the course as well as onto our YouTube channel if you want to share that with any of your colleagues. All right, y'all have a great rest of your day. Take care.